The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the speakers or authors and do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions held by the producers of this broadcast. The material herein is for entertainment purposes only.
Welcome to Scary Stories with Kalila. We have a very special show tonight. Myself and Allan Gilbreath, who will be joining me later in the show, we're going to continue our examination of serial killers. Some people believe they're all related to one another. We started off the show with Jacques Saint Germain and talked a little bit about a character who called himself Jack. And from there, we looked at Jack the Ripper and Spring Heel Jack of London. Tonight, we're going to examine the Axe Murderer of New Orleans. Now, what can be more terrifying than a serial killer? A lot of people are scared of those ghosts and goblins that go bump in the night. But let's face it, a real killer, someone in your home, someone who seeps in without you knowing it. And that was the case with the Axe Murderer of New Orleans. In the 1918 and 1919, in the years of 1918 through 1919, he attacked numerous people, many of whom were sleeping in their beds when he managed to get to them. There was never a point of entry. There was never a broken lock. Usually only a small chip in the wood, in a panel of a door, that would indicate that he had even been there. But all of the victims shared one thing in common. They were all mutilated with an axe. Imagine lying in bed, thinking you're alone, and suddenly, out of nowhere, the axe drops onto you, repeatedly, over and over again. You scream in agony, but no one hears you. What can be more terrifying? Well, we're going to take a look at this axe murderer and examine the psychology behind what happened and make a comparison, because very recently, about a year ago, I found out that there was yet another axe murderer in western Louisiana who had some similar characteristics in our Axeman of New Orleans. We'll be right back. Follow me, Kalila Smith, into the mysterious world of spirits. Searching for Spirits, the ultimate guide for ghost hunters, is a concise how-to manual for anyone who enjoys a good ghost hunt. Learn the history of spiritualism, learn what a ghost is and what is not. Learn the truth about poltergeist. We'll also delve into the realm of spiritual beings that never were human, the world of demons, real vampires, and we'll look at some real case studies. This is a must-have for everyone interested in ghost hunting, from the novice to the expert. Completely updated in its second edition, this is one of the first guides for ghost hunting based on actual first-hand experiences. Available on Amazon.com. Searching for Spirits, the ultimate guide for ghost hunters, by Kalila Smith. Welcome back to Scary Stories with Kalila and Allan Gilbreath, who is now with us. I don't dare ask where he's been. It is a full moon, you know. What difference does it make? He's back, and we are back to talk about some serial killers. Mm-hmm. And who knows better than Allan? So enough said on that. So, Allan, I sent you some interesting information about an axe murderer.
Yes.
The Notorious Axe Murderer. Most people know about this. If you don't know about it from the news that had been going on back in the early 1900s, you certainly know about it from American Horror Story, because they featured him on one of the episodes, or a couple of them, where he came back to life. And he's a very notorious killer. I say he, but maybe he wasn't a he. There was a lot of speculation that this might have been a woman. One of the things that was in particular, regardless of the murders that were going on, one of the things that was in particular was that he never really opened a door. There was never a breaking in. There was never a key that opened a door and locked it back. There was never any point of entry. Usually there was a little bit of a piece of wood maybe etched out which could have been done with an axe. And they know that the murders were done with an axe. And sometimes an entire panel, if you're used to those old doors that have little panels in them, sometimes an entire panel would be chiseled out, but not large enough for an adult male to get through. So there was a lot of speculation on what or who this person was. For a long time, people thought maybe this was someone supernatural. It's even been suggested that this was a vampire of sorts that was conducting these murders, which is why a lot of people think it goes back to the old Saint Germain story, which ended. Saint Germain left in 1901. He disappeared. And then these axe murderers actually started in Western Louisiana in 1910. And then it stopped for a while and it resumed in 1918 with the Notorious Axe Murderer. A lot of people thought maybe it was a little person, maybe, or a child that was going in and doing this. Of course, a child would not be strong enough to wield the axe the way this guy did. And a little person wouldn't have been tall enough because sometimes the person was not in bed sleeping. Some of these people were attacked on the street. But sometimes, every now and then, the police would go, maybe it's a woman. Now, what's interesting about that is because I did happen upon an axe murderer in Western Louisiana who is accused of some murders right around the same time. Some of the murders that were presumably done by the axe murderer. All of this was kind of going on simultaneously. So it's very, very interesting.
Well, just right off the hand, of course, you can't imagine really a more grisly murder. Looking at what you sent me, the first thing that struck me was just how awful being killed with an axe had to be. It was a cross between being stabbed and bludgeoned to death. I mean, there was no good death here. It wasn't like you got shot and you fell over dead, or you were poisoned, or somebody had the decency to know how to use a knife right, and you were dead within moments. I mean, this is a terrible, vicious, and also very, very powerful way to kill somebody. A gun's easy. Anybody can shoot a gun. If your victims are incapacitated, anybody could use a knife. So, it has to be we're looking for a big evil man, doesn't really count. But then again, an axe, because of its mass, a smaller person could do a frightening amount of damage. So, just right out of the hat, this is kind of a specialty way of killing somebody. This isn't, this doesn't strike me as any one of these murders having been a murder of coincidence or convenience, or even of just that the axe happened to be there next to the fireplace and that's what they used. I mean, these were much more, planned, I guess.
They were orchestrated. Yeah, they were orchestrated.
The axe is never, the axe is not there. The axe is not at the scene of the crime. So, these people are murdered brutally, and the murder weapon is removed. There's not an axe laying there for somebody to come along and go, aha, well, we know how this died. So this is amazingly grisly. And during this little short piece of time from about 1900 to about 1920, it's just looking at, like Texas, Louisiana, possibly throw in Mississippi, things right there along the coast, all basically connected by the Gulf of Mexico. My goodness, this isn't like 2 or 3 murders. I just can't believe an axe, is a weapon of convenience. I mean, this seems there's a lot of murders here, and there's not just 2 or 3. There are dozens, and it's all in the same time. So either there was a lot of copycatting, one person was really busy, or there's even the hint that there's more than one murderer.
Submitted for your approval. New Orleans. Seductive, magical, mysterious, and haunted. There is no place on this earth with as much ghost and vampire activity as New Orleans. Imagine, if you will, a tour. A tour that takes you to sites in the French Quarter of actual documented hauntings. The Haunted History Tour is just that tour. Every day, every night, all year round. This tour has been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN. And it's available to you. Are there ghosts and vampires in the French Quarter? Find out by taking the tour that everyone is talking about. The Haunted History Tour. For more information, call Haunted History Tours at 861-2727. That's 861-2727. This is not a Halloween spookhouse. This is real.
Okay, the whole thing with the axe is that's just not a common everyday weapon. Somebody just doesn't think, "Woo, I'm going to go kill Bob. Let me go get my axe." They might think, "Let me go get my pistol." But I can't see somebody sitting around going, "Bob made me mad, so I'm going to go kill Bob. Where's the axe?" That might be how you kill a chicken for dinner. But I'm not seeing that as a...
It was pretty bizarre, especially in the city.
Well,
if it was out in the middle of...
You can't walk down the street with that. Well, she used a hatchet, allegedly.
Oh, okay. Well, okay.
A little smaller, but
But still. But she was like in like a farmhouse, and there was an axe out there in the yard, and she just kind of grabbed it.
Yeah, but not this many murders all over Louisiana and Texas and that.
Yeah, this is over several years. Yeah. The first one shows up, as you can tell by what I sent you, in 1910. Now, interestingly enough, also in 1910, in the same vicinity, we have another axe murderer.
Yes, we do.
Only this one was a woman, and she was a voodoo priestess. And that one's kind of interesting. And I am going to flip over to my notes here, because this is a lot of information here, folks. This is just a lot of information. And
like I said, it's just a shocking...
in West Crowley, Louisiana.
Yes. So I'm wondering if this sect of extremists didn't have more than one operative out there playing with an axe.
Well, it could have been. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same thing, but what a coincidence because all along people have implied that he was the one conducting these murders in Western Louisiana and in Texas, and then the murders stopped and then picked up again in 1918. So it was looked upon at the time by the police, well, maybe he was in prison, and then maybe he served some time and he got out. But after finding out about Priestess Clementine, I'm thinking that maybe the Axeman didn't commit those murders in Western Louisiana. Those might have been all committed by her cult. Could be a totally isolated situation, because there is a gap in time, a few years.
Yes. But that gap in time could be explained by these people having their attentions elsewhere, because there are axe murders all over the Gulf of Mexico. So, yeah, I'm just like, wow, what a grisly weapon choice. I'm still hung up on, it's an axe. This is a big weapon. This isn't a knife or a gun that's fairly easy to conceal. This isn't a Garrett or other assassination weapon. I mean, this is a big mass weapon you're sneaking around at night with.
Yeah, it's pretty huge. I mean, it's pretty heavy.
And then we have the methods in which people were killed. A lot of people were asleep.
Yeah, a lot of them were asleep. And, the funny thing is, and, again, for the longest time, I thought maybe, and a lot of other people thought, well, maybe Jack the Ripper came to, the New World came to the United States, and he became the axe murderer. But it's looking more and more like maybe this woman, this was more connected with something more localized. I don't know.
I don't think an axe is too far out of the realm of Jack the Ripper.
Yeah,
I think the axe is just way out of there.
Too. Yeah, well, the Axeman had sent a letter to the editor of the Times-Picayune, very a la Jack the Ripper, kind of a ripoff. And it was from Hottest Hell. And he sends it to Dear Esteemed Mortal. And he goes on to explain that he was never human and that they will never find out who he is. And he's very, very elusive. He said that he describes himself as flying over the city. On the night that he requested all the jazz music being played and that he would not kill anybody if everybody was playing jazz music, he said, I will be passing over your city, as if he's flying over. Again, lending itself to believe that he's some sort of supernatural being. Of course, that could be his own delusions.
Well, I mean, since this particular murderer was never caught, the actual Axeman, or whoever the perpetrator was, the Axeman of New Orleans is an unsolved series of crimes. So we don't have anybody to ask. We don't have anybody to ask, what did you mean you were flying over the city, or you would be passing over the city? Because that's almost a biblical phrase with the, we're passing over the house. If you've got the lamb's blood up, we won't, we'll pass over your house. So, I mean, he could be making a veiled biblical reference. He could be implying that he would be flying through the city on, the boots of Apollo, or, I mean, we have no idea, because we can't ask this person the question of, but there was that weird tie-in to jazz, and a lot of the people that were murdered by the true Axeman of New Orleans were Italian immigrants.
Correct. Not just Italian immigrants, but Italian grocers in particular. All
of the victims, it smacks of a particular aspect of the victim, of that particular type of person. A grocer from Italy with all of the stereotypes and trials and tribulations of being from Italy and a grocer. So why he would pick on them?
Well, at that time, in the early part of the 1900s, New Orleans had taken on a lot of Italian immigrants.
Yes.
There was a lot of people who had come here and resettled from Sicily specifically. And in fact, a large portion of what we know now as the French Quarter had become housing for low-income Italian immigrants. And there's even portions of the French Quarter that was called Little Sicily.
Yes.
And there was a lot of mafia activity going on at the time. So you've got that element going in. There was a lot of organized crime at the time. The mafia was kind of running everything with regards to that community. So there's a lot of that tone going on around it.
Well, it kind of paints a political picture where you've got an immigrant population being savagely threatened by this bizarre method. And because the weapon of choice is so unique, it lends itself to being probably the same group of people spinning off axe murderers of over this about 20-year span. Because, we may have had one church member go to New Orleans, and we may have another one go to Slidell, and may have another one go to Shreveport, and may have another one go as far away as Houston. And the common thread that ties them together is the axe. Makes them,
Right.
yeah, I mean, it just drives the whole thing very, very home. But I mean, this is not, this is not Game of Thrones time. I mean, this is 1913. We're heading into the Roaring 20s. We're heading into all of these great things that are about to be taking place. And here we have a population absolutely terrified that somebody's going to break into their home and chop them up to death with an axe. I mean, that's intimidation.
Yeah, it is indeed. So we're going to take a little break, and we're going to come back and examine this a little bit further and look at our voodoo priestess over on the western part of Louisiana and see if there's any correlation to this. We'll be right back. Step beyond the veil that separates our world from the world of the spirits with me, Kalila Smith, as we uncover the mysteries of the afterlife. This is a spiritual journey as we try to discover if life really does continue after the physical death. Are after-death communications real, or do we imagine them? Get my book, Afterlife Mysteries Revealed, and find out. Afterlife Mysteries Revealed, available on Amazon.com by Kalila Smith. Okay, so we're back. I mean, this is crazy. We've got two, not just one axe murder in the early 1900s, but we have two in South Louisiana, and one of them's a woman. And a woman who was the head of a church, no less. They called her a voodoo priestess, but she had little to do with the religion of voodoo. I think her father was actually a minister of some type, and she took over his church and kind of converted it to some sort of a cult. Not really voodoo. I think back then, anything they couldn't understand, they called it voodoo, for lack of a better terminology. But,
no, like today, it sounds good on the sales brochure.
Right. But, this was in January of 1911. The police office in West Crowley, Louisiana, and I'm reading this directly from the article, they were called in, and they went to a home that was on Western Avenue, and they found three occupants, a man, a woman, and a small boy lying in bed with their skulls split open. The beds were drenched in blood, and bloody footprints speckled the floor. The doors were locked, indicating that the killer had come through a window and murdered the family while they slept. Now, does this sound familiar? Very much like our axe murderer of New Orleans.
Yes.
There was a bucket of blood in one corner. At the head of the bed, just above the bashed-in bodies, stood a bloodied axe. The newspaper called it the most brutal murder in the history of this section. But it was just one of the axe slayings that would terrify parts of Louisiana and Texas in the early 1910s. The crimes would be connected to the rumors of a deranged voodoo priestess and cult called the Church of Sacrifice, which was said to butcher its victims as a part of their strange rites. And the leader of this cult was a woman by the name of Clementine Barnabé, who had absolutely nothing to do with voodoo at the time, but she eventually confessed to the killing of 35 people.
Oh, my goodness.
But however many people she really murdered is unknown.
Well, once you confess to one, confessing to 30 is,
axe.
And that's a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. It's a lot of people, and she literally, what they described as brained them with an axe, just split their heads open, and entire families, and usually while they were in bed asleep, much like our friend, the axe murderer in New Orleans. Also, no point of entry, no break-in. She somehow got in, perhaps through a window or what have you. She didn't break in through the door. She didn't break the lock. And she kills these families, butchers them in their sleep, and then moves on to the next family. But the difference in Clementine Barnaby's murders is that she was focusing not on Italian grocers, but she was focusing on a particular cultural group, and most of these people were African American.
It's just, oh my gosh.
So,
I'm wondering who inspired who here, because once again, I'm really, my sticking point to all of this is the axe. That is just, that is such a committed weapon. You're going to kill somebody with an axe. Again, you didn't crawl in through the window and there's Kalila sitting at the table. So we're going to point the gun at Kalila and we're going to pull the trigger and no more Kalila. And you can even regret pulling the trigger, but pulling the trigger was easy. So that type of murder is, I guess, it can be as impassioned or as insensitive as you want. Now, if you're going to stab somebody with a knife, that takes a little more expertise and a little more of the act of surprise. But here we go. We got somebody laying in their bed, and you're going to walk in there with an axe, and you're going to wind up and swing with everything you got to deliver this first blow. Because, all right, as you said, maybe this isn't the biggest person in the world. Maybe the person doing this is very slender, or could be a woman, or had the right body type for whatever reason to be able to break into these homes, and wasn't a great big guy like me. So, I mean, it could have been a very slender person, but then you have a very mass weapon. And so you're going to have to line up on the bed, get your victim where you need them, and then you're going to take this great big 5-pound, 4-pound, maybe even up to 10-pound axe, and you're going to have to swing it with everything you've got, because if you don't take them out with the first swing, you're now got a wounded, mad person awake, and now you have to deal with that.
Yeah, not to mention the other two you haven't killed yet. They're awake too. I mean, they could have easily overcome this person and turned the tables, or shot the person with the axe. I mean, a lot of different things could have happened. So the element of surprise was there. But now what's interesting about Miss Clementine is that she had a very strange instance in her life. In 1911, the police were focused on Raymond Barnaby. Now, Raymond Barnaby was her father, and he was a local petty criminal and sharecropper from Lafayette. He was arrested based on suspicions from his mistress after a fight, and she suggested that there was a possible connection to the murders. During his trial in 1911, Raymond's children, Zephyrine and Clementine Barnaby, testified against their father, and the teenage told a graphic story of her father returning home one night with blood on his clothes as he threatened the family. Zephyrine confirmed the story, adding that their father bragged that he killed a whole damn Andrews family. Both children said they feared for their life if their father was free. Now later, people think that Clementine maybe was the murderer and that she set her father up. Because while Raymond sat in jail, another murder took place on November 26, 1911. Norbert Randall and his wife and 3 children and nephew were all murdered in Lafayette in the same heinous fashion, but with one horrific addition. While the rest of the family was attacked with an axe, Norbert was shot in the head. Now, interesting, because while Raymond is in jail accused of these other murders, this took place in Lafayette, which is smack dab in the middle of that western Louisiana border, Texas, and New Orleans. So we know that he didn't Raymond Barnaby did not.
Well, he couldn't have done those. He's in jail.
He was in jail. That's correct. But when the police came to the Barnaby residence, when they arrested Raymond, blood from the Andrus murders had been discovered on not Raymond's clothes, but Clementine's. She testified during her father's trial that he had wiped the blood there, but the sheriff wasn't so sure. So still at this time, they're blaming her on it. And they found quite a bit of evidence. They actually found in November of 1911, a complete suit of women's clothes in her room, saturated with blood and covered with human brains. The latch on the door was covered in blood. Zephyrine provided the alibi for the night of the murders, but Clementine had none. And then she was taken to jail. Now, while Clementine's in jail, though, what happened? In January of 1912, guess what happened? Felix Broussard, his wife, and their 3 children are killed in her Lake Charles, Louisiana home.
Yes.
With what?
An axe. Oh,
and
my gosh.
There was a message written in blood that spelled a spooky sentence. When he maketh the inquisition for blood, he forgetteth not the cry of the humble. The message was signed, Human 5. How strange. Isn't that bizarre? So how could she have done it unless it was some of her followers? Now that's another thing, they're saying that perhaps she had followers because she was the leader of a cult. She had basically taken over this church and kind of started turning it into some sort of cult-like situation.
Well, I mean, so she has these true believers gathered around her. They're hanging on her every word, and again, I just keep going back to the choice of murder weapons here is so amazingly specific. And it's not that other weapons aren't available. There are weapons of convenience available, and you can always bring a gun.
Yeah, there's many weapons. Yeah. Well,
but,
that's pretty bizarre.
Well, you brought an axe and this person jumps up and it doesn't look like you're going to be able to overpower them. Shoot them.
Or somebody else with you shoots them.
And that's the other terrible thing. The thought that 2 or 3 people might have shown up, a couple of people to hold you down while this third person with the axe does the deed.
Now they're thinking that, now I don't know if this is just presumed or not, but the El Paso Gazette at the time titled the murders "The Voodoo Horrors Break Out Again" and suggested that the crimes were in connection to human sacrifice as part of voodoo ritual. Well, of course, in the voodoo religion, there are no human sacrifices, not really. But back then, they may have, wanted to call it voodoo for, like I said, lack of a better thing. But the 6
It looks good in the title. It looks good in the title.
Yeah, it was sensationalism, as the media likes to do. The members, though, of the Wexford family who perished at the hands of whatever fanatic it was, there was an infant that had been born only the day before the tragedy.
Oh.
And in all probability had not been taken into consideration when the plans for human sacrifice were consummated. And apparently the infant lived. Kind of makes you wonder what happened to that person. Very strange. Very, very strange.
Yeah, there's a lifetime of therapy waiting to happen.
Yeah, can you imagine being that kid? I mean, so now the Reverend King Harris, who was a Pentecostal revival priest and preacher with a small congregation connected to the Christ Sanctified Holy Church. He had been brought in for interrogations after rumors of religious involvement had him connected to a church of sacrifice.
See, that's, that's...
It's so bizarre. They're going from from Pentecostal to voodoo. It sounds like they're grabbing at straws, really. I don't think they really know what direction to go in.
But it sounds like we're chasing multiple targets, though. I think that was what was so confusing about this. I don't think we're looking for a single murderer. I think we're looking for a series of people carrying out these acts for a wide variety of their own reasons.
Well, they started calling the people who might be involved with this the Human Five Gang because of the signature Human Five. So it could have been 5 people, indicating that there was a multiple amount of people who were involved in these murders for whatever reason. And just seems a little strange that they would have been random murders just for human sacrifice. I mean,
well,
usually if you're going to do human sacrifice, not that I'm an expert on human sacrifice, but I tend to know a little bit about the occult and about, cults. But, certainly if you're going to do some sort of ritualistic act, generally that's going to be done in the confines of a ritualistic setting.
Yeah, that's not going to be...
Not going to be in somebody's bedroom.
Some bedroom someplace, right.
Yeah, a family breaking in and chopping them up in their bed and leaving them. That usually if you're going to have some sort of a ritual killing, it's going to be done in the confines of a formal ritual.
But then we go back to mafia activity, and in a horrible sort of way, this is almost a premeditated form of murder. Does that make sense? That somebody actually went,
well,
all right, this is going to be the gang's MO. If we want you dead, we're going to chop you up like firewood.
Maybe. There's just so many different speculations on here.
Well, and it's bizarre.
And the question is, why did she sold her father down the river by having him sent to jail, and then I don't think they ever really proved. I mean, they say she confessed to it, but was she even in her right mind? I mean, was this woman... you have to really kind of look at this.
Well, if we follow just kind of the normal pattern of the abused child generally turns into the abuser. So at the golden opportunity to get rid of her father, she gets him, wrapped up, packed up, and shipped off to prison, thus leaving her the larger playground to continue her own activities.
Yeah, it could have also been copycat crimes, because in the article it is noting that there were more than one set of axe murders terrorizing Louisiana around the same time. And the murders of the infamous Axeman of New Orleans tormented locals in the late 1910s. So it is documented that his MO was going on at the same time, and those murders were never solved. And so that does lend itself that maybe he was put in jail and got out. And then it's saying several decades earlier, a killer sometimes called the servant girl Annihilator.
Wow, what a name.
Yeah, the servant girl Annihilator committed several axe murders in the 1880s in Austin, Texas. Again, crimes that had never been solved. But more than a century later, the Axeman of New Orleans, Austin, Texas, and Clementine Barnaby, these stories continue to haunt us to this day.
Yes, they do.
So again, are they connected? Are they not connected? I would think that by this point in time, maybe it's so cold. It's so many years have gone by. I don't think there's any way to really kind of connect the dots on this and see if they were even connected. But it's interesting, very interesting.
Well,
but I think we can alleviate that this was not Jack the Ripper. This is just a totally different MO, and the whole axe murderer thing took off in a way different trajectory.
Yeah, a whole different
past
thing.
Jack
Yeah.
the Ripper. Yeah, it's not the same.
Yeah, there's a whole different feel to this. There's a whole different MO to this of, if you're Jack the Ripper, you're really good with knives. You're going to stick with what you know. You're not going to come to the new world and suddenly decide I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. I'm going to go get me a big old axe, and that's how I'm going to settle my scores. I mean, that's, when we look at the lost voodoo church there with this lady in charge of it, you get a feeling she's telling the parishioners, this is, if you do this or you donate to the church and give us all the things we need or want, then we can make the world a better place by making them disappear one at a time.
I don't know. Pretty bizarre.
It's very, I don't know.
So many of these things happened and were never solved.
And that's just it, because there's just not a consistent MO. And whether we're talking about the Italian immigrant community or we're talking about ex-church members or people in the community around these churches, but we have at least 2 social groups connected to axe murders.
Right.
2 churches. I mean, that's just, you talk about scary stories. I mean, that's probably the scariest place you could start.
Well, it's really scary is the thought that they never, ever found who it was. And it could be someone who's supernatural. It could be somebody that could still appear in the dark shadows of your bedroom late at night.
I'm gonna go with, well,
a little out there, but
considering how long people lived at this particular time, I'm going to have to say the reason this stuff stops is something physically happens to the person who's perpetrating these crimes. They get sick, and keep in mind, you didn't have to die, but if you got a disease like polio, you are hardly going to be able to continue chasing people down with an axe.
If you get arthritis, you're not going to be able to chase people down with an axe.
Well, we kind of point out, because now I tell you what I find really, really interesting is all of this stuff stops about 1918, right?
Yeah. With the Axeman murderer, it all stops in 1918, and it is suspected that they did catch who it is. They didn't catch him, but it's suspected that somebody murdered him. That the wife of one of the men that was killed by the axe murderer, she followed, kind of stalked the guy, and wound up gunning him down at some point. And a lot of people think that he was perhaps the axe murderer in New Orleans, and that's why it all stopped, was that she killed him.
Very possible, but I'm going to throw in another major historical event of 1918. The Spanish flu.
Ooh, oh my God, pandemics. Talk about pandemics, huh? Wow, let me jump. We had a pandemic come into the picture. Man, that must have been as bad as 2020, right? You have all these axe murders, and then boom, you got a pandemic on top of that. Yeah.
Well, you just finished World War I. So during World War I, when we have all of these people being displaced and moved around and becoming refugees and immigrants of, welcome to 1914 to 1918. Welcome to the political unrest the few years before the war broke out. So during this time, we're very turbulent and very unsettled on a good day. So here's 1914, here's 1910, and we've got these terrible things happening, but World War II kicks in. All of the resources that needed to go into World War I, of all the resources needed for World War I are being withdrawn and taken overseas. So now you're left with, what kind of police department was left after all able-bodied men went and joined the military?
Not much.
Well, so I'm just kind of pointing out that there was such a political upheaval at the time, and we had so many people coming and going. We had such an influx of refugees from World War I, and Italian Americans were definitely, those Italian born were definitely coming to the country. But, the reason all this stopped is, well, very possibly the murderer or murderers died.
Well, see, that would make sense. That would make sense because, yeah, a lot of people died during that Spanish flu. A lot.
25 million people. And New Orleans was a known spot for it.
It lasted 2 years. Yeah.
Yes.
It lasted 2 years. Yeah. It was huge in New Orleans. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I'm kind of throwing in the timing of all of this stopping. And I keep looking down at these lists, and it's how many people are on here, the known victims of, and the list is just page after page. All of that, all of this, the axe murderers and all of that kind of activity came to a screeching halt when the flu showed up. Well, but all of the other murders, all of this wraps up by 1920.
And the flu was done by then too.
Oh, it took it 2 rounds because it wiped out about 5 million people the first time it came through, and then took out about another 20 million the second time it came through. So there was a lot of death. There was a lot of death going on at this particular moment, and some of it may have been self-inflicted, and some of it may have been self-solving.
That's true. That's true. So I guess we may never find out who those axe murderers were, huh? But I think we can lay to rest any rumors that it was Jack the Ripper. And I think that's what I wanted to accomplish with this show, is to really examine that. And then the whole storyline just kind of took off, as it likes to do, in its own direction, and kind of lead you down another avenue. Because obviously, though, there's no way that it was Jack the Ripper. It's not the same.
The MO is just completely wrong. So if you're a murderer, basically by the time you become a murderer, you already have kind of your criminal pattern built up. If you've killed one person and you're going to kill another, you've learned from the first person you killed. Yeah, I hate to put it that way. It sounds so educational. But the more people you kill, the better you get at where to hit them, what to do with them, like any other, I guess you would say, sport.
Well, guys, I think this is a little food for thought. It's something for you all to think about as you're lying in bed tonight. Watching that curtain move, wondering if it's just a part of your vivid imagination, or perhaps it's something a little bit more. So, if you have a scary story that you would like to share with us, please get in touch with us. You can contact us on our page, Scary Stories by Kalila. You can like the page. That would be wonderful. And join our group. We have a private group that's specifically for sharing of stories. We want to hear your story. And if we like it enough, we'll even bring you on the show and talk to you about it. So for now, we're going to say good night, pleasant nightmares, and keep an eye on that curtain that's waving back and forth.
Sweet dreams.
Good night, folks.